Today's mindful moment, packed with insights but designed to fit into your busy life. Ever feel like history is just names and dates? Yeah, me too sometimes. But get ready to rethink how we view the Supreme Court, because today we're diving into the fascinating world of the court through the eyes of Justice John Paul Stevens. And trust me, you won't look at those black robes the same way again.
You got that right.
We're exploring Five Chiefs, his memoir, where he reflects on his time on the court and shares his unique perspective on the chief justices he served with.
Yeah.
And this isn't just about legal history. This is about power personalities and how decisions made decades ago still shape our lives today.
Absolutely. And what makes this deep dive so fascinating is that Stevens doesn't view the court's history as a straight timeline, but as distinct chapters defined by each Chief Justice.
Oh, okay. I like that.
It's like looking at 17 different teams with different captains, each leaving their mark on the game.
Okay, I love that analogy.
Yeah.
So starting with the OG John Marshall, we all know his name's on a courthouse, but what really makes him such a big deal?
Yeah. Well, Stevens takes us beyond the textbook version of Marshall highlighting cases that still shape our world today. Think Marbury v. Madison, which established judicial review, the court's power to declare laws unconstitutional.
Wow.
That's a huge check on the other branches of government.
Talk about power. And that power extends to interpreting the Constitution, which brings us to the Second Amendment. Stevens points out that under Marshall, it was understood to only apply to the federal government, leaving states to regulate guns as they saw fit. Can you imagine how different things would be if that had stayed the case?
It's a mind-blowing thought experiment, right? Legal and political landscape would be completely different.
Yeah.
In Barron v. Baltimore, Marshall's interpretation meant states had much more leeway when it came to guns. It makes you realize how these seemingly ancient cases have a ripple effect that reaches us even today.
It really challenges the idea that history is just something in the past. These decisions are still shaping our present. Now fast forward to the Great Depression and FDR's New Deal. That's when Chief Justice Hughes was at the helm, and things got pretty heated between the court and the president.
Absolutely. FDR was pushing his New Deal programs, but the court kept striking them down as unconstitutional.
Oh, wow.
Frustrated, FDR came up with his infamous court packing plan, proposing to add more justices to get a favorable majority. Stevens, having experienced the court's workload firsthand, offers a fascinating perspective on this power struggle, arguing that FDR's claims about efficiency were a smokescreen.
So it wasn't really about the workload, but about political maneuvering. I'm starting to see a pattern here. Power dynamics seem to be just as important as legal principles. And speaking of power, Stevens was a clerk under Chief Justice Vinson, who apparently had a close relationship with President Truman. Stevens even mentions Vinson's poker games with Truman. And some speculate they discussed national policy during those games.
Oh, yeah, they did. There's even a rumor that something Vinson said during one of those games might have influenced Truman's decision to seize the steel mills during the Korean War, leading to the landmark case Youngstown Sheet and Tube Cove v. Sawyer. But what's even more fascinating is that the court, including two of Truman's own appointees, ruled against him.
Oh, wow.
It demonstrates how these justices truly believed in upholding the law, even when it meant going against a friend and powerful president.
That's a powerful example of judicial independence. These weren't just puppets following party lines. They were making decisions based on principle, even when the stakes were high. Youngstown set a major precedent for limiting presidential power, and it all stems back to a casual poker game.
Mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Right. It shows how history is shaped by these seemingly insignificant moments. And here's another example from Vinson's time as Chief Justice that really highlights the human impact of the court's decisions. Stevens discusses the Boblow Excursion Company Michigan case, which challenged a whites-only policy on a ferry running between Detroit and Canada. It's a stark reminder that segregation wasn't just a Southern issue, it was happening right there in the North.
It's crazy to think that just a ferry ride could be subject to such blatant discrimination. It makes you wonder what the justices were thinking, how their own backgrounds and biases might have influenced their opinions.
Stevens reveals that some justices seemed more concerned about the burden on the ship owner than about the injustice of racial segregation. It highlights how social context and personal views inevitably play a role in interpreting the law, even at the highest level. And speaking of personal views, Stevens had a front row seat to Justice Frankfurter's unique style during oral arguments.
Oh yeah, Frankfurter. He was known for grilling lawyers, right? Wasn't he a bit of a terror in the courtroom?
He could be Cerbid. Stevens describes him as unpredictable, sometimes seeming unprepared, other times treating lawyers like students in a classroom. He even recounts a story of Thurgood Marshall long before he became a justice, standing up to Frankfurters' relentless questioning, refusing to back down, despite knowing he wouldn't win that particular battle.
It's like a glimpse into the future, Justice Marshall's unwavering commitment to justice. It's these little details, these personal interactions that make history come alive. Stevens also talks about how the court's workload has changed dramatically since his early days as a clerk.
Right.
Yeah.
He contrasts the court in 1947, where they discussed practically every case, to the modern court, which uses a discuss list to manage the overwhelming volume of cases.
Oh.
It makes you wonder how they decide which cases get priority and how that might affect the development of the law.
It's a reminder that the court is a living, breathing institution constantly adapting to new challenges. So far, we've covered judicial review, segregation, presidential power, and a whole lot of personality clashes. I can't wait to see what other insights Stevens has in store for us.
Well, next up, we'll delve into the chapter on Earl Warren, the Chief Justice, who led the court during a time of immense social change, including the landmark Brown v. Board of Education decision. But as you'll see, Warren's impact extends far beyond that one monumental case.
I'm ready. Let's do it.
When most people think of Earl Warren, they think of Brown v. Board and the desegregation of schools. But Stevens paints a much broader picture, revealing a man deeply committed to global peace through law. It's easy to forget that these justices had lives and passions outside the courtroom.
It humanizes them, right?
Yeah.
They weren't just legal machines. They were people with hopes and dreams for a better world.
Absolutely. And Stevens actually compares Warren to a successful businessman, drawing a connection between his own experience with savvy clients and Warren's knack for navigating complex legal and diplomatic situations. He even tells this amusing anecdote about a business negotiation in London that went south because of something as trivial as brown shoes.
Oh.
Yeah, he was representing a client in England, and their British counterparts kept emphasizing the importance of black shoes in formal settings. He saw it as a subtle power play, a way of undermining his client who was dressed more casually. The deal ultimately collapsed, ending up in litigation.
Wow, talk about reading between the lines. It shows you have to be attuned to those unspoken rules and expectations.
Yeah.
But getting back to Warren's legal legacy, what other significant cases did Stevens highlight?
Well beyond Brown v. Board, Stevens discusses Reynolds v. Sims, the case that established the one-person, one-vote principle, revolutionizing voting rights. However, he also acknowledges his own evolving views on gerrymandering, a problem back then and still a major issue today.
It's interesting how a decision meant to ensure fair representation can also create unintended consequences. Gerrymandering is such a complex issue, and it shows that even landmark cases can have unforeseen ripple effects. And then there's Miranda v. Arizona, a case that's practically part of pop culture now. Every cop show on TV references those Miranda rights.
Right. It's become so ingrained in our legal system. But it's important to remember the context. The Miranda ruling under Warren's leadership aimed to protect the dignity and rights of individuals during police interrogations. It wasn't just about legal procedures, it was about ensuring fairness and preventing coercion.
It makes you appreciate the impact these decisions have on our everyday lives. It's not just abstract legal theory, it's about real people and their interactions with the law. But Stevens also doesn't shy away from some of the less than perfect aspects of Warren's tenure. He mentions finding paragraphs copied from a lawyer's brief in one of Warren's opinions without proper attribution.
That's right. Stevens is clearly an admirer of Warren, but he's honest about certain shortcomings.
Yeah.
It raises questions about the role of clerks in drafting opinions and the level of scrutiny applied to the final product.
Interesting.
It also humanizes these legal giants, showing they're not infallible.
It's a reminder that even the highest court in the land is made up of people, and people make mistakes. And speaking of human moments, Stevens shares a funny story about Warren Burger, the next Chief Justice. Apparently, Burger almost took a tumble during his first oral argument because of confusing seating instructions from Justice Powell.
I love that story.
It's a lighthearted anecdote that reminds us that even amidst the seriousness of the court's work, there are moments of humor and even clumsiness. It also highlights the traditions and protocols that surround the court, things that might seem strange to outsiders.
Right, like their own little world.
Yeah, exactly. But beyond near falls, what were some of the key issues during Burger's time as Chief Justice?
Well, Stevens delves into Burger's evolving views on campaign finance, starting with his opposition to the Buckley v. Vallejo ruling, which struck down limits on campaign spending. He sided with Justice White's dissent, which predicted the endless escalation of campaign costs, a problem that's certainly come to pass.
It's almost prophetic how Justice White foresaw this issue that continues to plague our political system. It makes you wonder if things would be different if the court had taken a different approach back then.
And then there's the TVA v. Hill case, where a tiny endangered fish, the snail darter, halted a massive dam project. Stevens describes how the Attorney General even brought a jar with a snail darter to court, trying to downplay its significance.
I remember reading about that. It's crazy.
Right.
That image of the snail darter in a jar is so symbolic. It represents the power of the Endangered Species Act.
Yeah.
But it also raises questions about how to balance environmental protection with economic development.
It highlights those difficult choices that courts often face, weighing competing interests and values. And sometimes, as in this case, a tiny fish can have a huge impact.
It's a reminder that the law can be a powerful tool for protecting even the smallest and most vulnerable creatures. But let's move on to William Rehnquist, a figure known for his conservative views. Did Stevens offer any surprising insights about him?
Well, he starts with a humorous detail about Rehnquist adding gold stripes to his robes after the court rejected his proposal for more colorful attire. It shows that even behind that austere image, there was a bit of a fashion rebel.
I love those little humanizing details. It makes these larger-than-life figures more relatable.
But on a more serious note, Stevens explores Rehnquist's emphasis on states' rights and sovereign immunity, a legal principle that shields states from certain lawsuits. He explains how this led to the overturning of many federal laws, shifting the balance of power between states and the federal government.
That tension between federal power and states' rights is a recurring theme throughout American history, and it seems like Rehnquist played a significant role in tipping the scales towards the states.
And of course, we can't talk about Rehnquist without mentioning the 2000 election recount. Bush v. Gore Stevens expresses his surprise at the court's intervention, especially considering a previous case, Ruta Bush v. Gore, which seemed to support letting recounts proceed.
That election was a nail-biter, and the court's decision remains controversial to this day. It shows how even seemingly settled legal principles can be reinterpreted in different contexts, especially when the stakes are so high. But let's shift gears now to the current Chief Justice, John Roberts. What did Stevens have to say about him?
Stevens begins by contrasting Roberts' upbringing with his own. He points out that Roberts' childhood home was near the Indiana airfield, where Stevens learned to fly an airfield that later became a garbage dump. It's a stark juxtaposition, highlighting their vastly different paths to the court.
It's a reminder that these justices come from diverse backgrounds, and those experiences inevitably shape their worldview. But what about Roberts' judicial philosophy? Did Stevens offer any insights into that?
He reviews his personal belief that the Chief Justice oath should be administered at the Supreme Court, not the White House, emphasizing the separation of powers. It's a subtle but important point about maintaining the independence of the judiciary.
It shows how deeply Stevens cares about preserving the integrity of the court and its role as a check on the other branches of government. Did he discuss any specific cases that illustrate Roberts' judicial approach?
He delves into Roberts' views on the Eighth Amendment, which prohibits cruel and unusual punishment. Stevens highlights the evolution of his own thinking on this issue, moving from a focus on punishment methods to embracing the concept of proportionality, that punishments must fit the crime.
It's fascinating to see how Stevens' own views evolved over time, becoming more nuanced and focused on fairness rather than just the technicalities of the law. And it makes me wonder how Roberts' views on this and other issues might evolve as he continues his tenure as Chief Justice.
That's a great point. It reminds us that the court is constantly changing, as are the justices themselves. And Stevens emphasizes the importance of that evolution, particularly through dissenting opinions. He argues that it's crucial for justices to clearly state their views even when they disagree with the majority.
It's like he's saying, don't just go along to get along. Stand up for what you believe in, even if you're the lone voice. And that brings us to the final chapter. Justice Anthony Kennedy, a justice often seen as a swing vote. What did Stevens have to say about him?
Stevens explores Kennedy's impact on issues like gay rights, highlighting cases like Romer v. Evans, which struck down an anti-gay Colorado law, and Lawrence v. Texas, which overturned the criminalization of homosexual sodomy.
Those were landmark decisions that expanded LGBTQ+ rights. And it's interesting to see how Stevens connects those cases to the broader arc of social progress. Did he discuss any other key issues that Kennedy influenced?
He connects the Grutter v. Bollinger affirmative action case to President Gerald Ford's personal experience with racial prejudice in college football, revealing Ford's lifelong support for fair treatment of minorities. It's a fascinating example of how personal experiences can shape views on complex legal issues.
It shows that these cases aren't just abstract debates. They're about real people's lives and the challenges they face. Did Stevens offer any thoughts on the broader debate surrounding affirmative action?
He challenges Chief Justice Roberts' simplistic view of ending racial discrimination by simply stopping discrimination. Stevens argues that it's not that easy, and that affirmative action policies are sometimes necessary to address systemic inequalities.
It's a complex issue with no easy answers, and it's clear that Stevens believes that the court has a role to play in ensuring equal opportunity for all. Did he discuss any other justices who took unexpected stances on controversial issues?
He highlights the unexpected twist of Justice Scalia, known for his conservative views, authoring the majority opinion in VOPA v. Stewart, a case upholding the rights of people with disabilities. It's a reminder that labels don't always tell the whole story, and even the most ideologically driven justices can surprise us.
It's a great example of how judging is a human endeavor, and these justices, despite their differences, are all trying to interpret the law in a way that serves justice. Did Stevens offer any final thoughts on the court and its role in our society?
He closes with a powerful quote from Abraham Lincoln, emphasizing the government's duty to provide justice to its citizens, connecting historical figures to modern legal debates. It's a fitting reminder that the principles underlying our legal system are timeless, and that the pursuit of justice is an ongoing endeavor.
Wow, it feels like we've been on this incredible journey through the Supreme Court's history, but it's not just about the past, is it? These cases, these personalities, they're still shaping our world today.
That's the power of Stevens' memoir. He brings the court down from this pedestal, showing us it's not some untouchable abstract entity. It's made up of individuals with their own backgrounds, experiences, and yes, even flaws.
And it reminds us that the law isn't just words on paper. It's about real people, real conflicts, and the constant struggle to balance competing interests and values.
Exactly. And those struggles are ongoing. We've talked about landmark cases, but what Stevens really emphasizes is the evolution of legal thought, how interpretations change, how new challenges arise.
Like that whole debate about sovereign immunity. It seemed to go back and forth over time, with different justices taking different approaches. And it makes you wonder, is the court really about the Chief Justice, or is every new member a chance to shift the balance?
That's the thought-provoking question Stevens leaves us with. We focused on the 5 chiefs, but he hints at the impact of each new justice, how the dynamics shift, how alliances form, and how the court's direction can change with every appointment.
It's like a constant game of legal chess,
Okay.
with each new player adding a new dimension. And for us, the players in this real-life drama, it means paying attention, understanding the stakes, and engaging in these debates because ultimately the court's decisions affect us all.
If this deep dive sparked your curiosity, you can find 5 Chiefs wherever books are sold. We've included a purchase link in the show notes.
And be sure to subscribe and share this episode to keep these important conversations going. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Supreme Court. It's a story that's still being written, and we're all a part of it.